I think as we start thinking about going back to the office, what we can't do is go back to the office and be based in butcher paper and sticky notes, right? That we need to think digitally. So we need to refresh our rituals. And I really think that you can drive a lot of the culture that you want to have and a lot of the outcomes that you want to have, but also get that social component through rituals and updating our rituals to be more modern and more digital friendly.
Welcome to the Human Insight Podcast, where we help you bridge the empathy gap to bring you a valuable, new understanding of some of the most innovative ideas and trends shaping the future of business and customer experience.
Welcome to the Human Insight Podcast presented by UserTesting. I'm Laura White, Director of Integrated Marketing at UserTesting, and I'd like to welcome our guests today, Mariano Suarez-Baton, CEO of Mural, the leading digital workspace for visual collaboration. Along with Mariano, we have Andy McMillan, CEO of UserTesting, Jim Callback, Chief Evangelist at Mural, and Janelle Estes, Chief Insights Officer at UserTesting. Welcome, everyone.
Hey, Laura.
Oh, thanks for the invitation.
Thank you for joining us. Let's kick things off today talking about distributed collaboration. Mariano, I'll start with you. What's it been like leading a distributed organization during the pandemic? And how are you thinking about this as we start looking at returning to the office?
That's a leading question. Why are we returning to, quote unquote, the office? Right? The reality is Jim has a phrase that work is not a place, it's what we accomplish together. And we kind of live by that one. So it's been tough, right? We hired 400 people in the last year remotely, and we're team building remotely. And it's not, quote unquote, natural as gathering around a fire pit or an office space like we knew from the past, but it's possible to build trust, to build camaraderie if you spend the time and you make time for that type of bonding to happen, right? And I always make the analogy to online gamers, right? And how they build friendships and guilds and so forth through virtual worlds. And it's all because there's rules of play, there's roles that people play, and of course, there's a goal and a purpose. We've been very diligent into describing why we do what we do, try to get mission-driven people, openly, transparently on our goals and the metrics of our business. And also, as I said, making time to play, making time to express feelings, making time to do things that would naturally come not through a screen but through a fire pit. But again, so far there's of course rough edges in everything, but we have a high ranked morale right now, even in the context of a global pandemic that of course makes things more challenging on a personal level.
Andy, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think those are great points that Mariano makes. And I agree with them. I think, user testing, we're thinking a lot about what do we do to just help people be productive. And I think that's both personally and professionally. I think there's been an acknowledgement through the last year of just people have a lot going on in their lives. And everybody's been trying to balance that now for quite a while, going back long before the pandemic. And so we've really leaned into thinking about flexibility and support for folks, in the tools we give them, in the way that we organize the work that we're asking them to do. I think we'll look at offices kind of the same way. They're a great asset for some kinds of things. We'll try to use them in a way to support people in a way that makes sense. I think the old idea of punching a clock in and out the door and that somehow that's what work was has definitely changed. I don't think we're going to go back to that kind of environment anytime soon. So it's nice to think that we can empower people to use technology to make their lives better and more productive and more connected versus spending time in the car driving to an office in traffic.
Let's bring Janelle and Jim into the conversation. As we operate in this distributed world, how are you thinking about fostering forward thinking and creativity, both within UserTesting and Mural respectively, and also within your audiences? Janelle, why don't you go first?
Sure. Yeah, it's a great question. And I think a big part of our roles in our everyday work is not only connecting with our teams, but also making sure that we're staying connected to our customers. I think, overnight, essentially, we saw this huge shift to pivot to work from home. And so that's actually changed a lot of how teams have had to figure out how to collaborate with their own teams, of course, but then also their customers. No more finding people in coffee shops or using your formal lab or even home visits. A lot of teams were doing that to stay close to their customers. So instead, people had to sort of move to more of these solutions that allowed them to connect digitally, remotely. And the interesting thing about this shift is twofold. One is it kind of gives people not an excuse to not get customer feedback, right? So everyone's at home, everyone's connected. In fact, people are even more available now than ever before. Like we aren't on planes, we aren't going on vacation. We all live online now. And so it's easier, perhaps even compared to pre-pandemic, to stay connected to your customers. And the other interesting piece of this is that people are humans and humans like to stay connected to other people. And we've essentially been starved of human connection for over a year now. So many people who are your customers, they're more willing to give you feedback and perspective and actually find meaning and joy in the experience of doing that. So I think it's actually in some ways, even though we're disconnected from each other physically, we've been able to remain closer to them through some of these remote technologies.
Jim, why don't you weigh in? How have you been thinking about this?
Yeah, well, I've been talking to Janelle about exactly this. In fact, we did a webinar called How Do You Stay Customer-Centric in a Digital World? I forget the exact name of it, but we were talking about some of those points that she brought up, and the fact that it's actually an opportunity to stay more customer-centric, assuming that's a mission of your company, which it should be. And some different ways that you can do that. In fact, we created a nice template. It was like a usability watching template to get more people inside of your organization exposed to that feedback, to that touch point. And which leads to, I think, a topic that I've been focused on recently as well, too, and brings up some of the points that Mariano was touching on around rituals. I think there's a lot of spontaneity when you're face-to-face, and a conversation can just kind of happen. And when you're distributed, you just have to be a little more deliberate about it. And a lot of that expresses itself through the rituals that we have. And they don't have to be, elaborate things like, Agile is essentially a collection of rituals, right? And we see a lot of our customers have more formal rituals, like at IBM, they have this thing called a playback. It can just be small things that really help and go a long way. We found in our survey, we do a survey every year, and for 2020, the biggest pain point that people had working remote was missing the social component, the personal contact, right? So often when I talk about rituals, I talk about how can you have, not a yearly retreat, but how can you have that social component to your work on a daily basis or on a meeting by meeting basis with little check-ins and little rituals. Like we have one called Pick Your Nick, where you let everybody know how you're feeling based on Nicolas Cage characters. It takes about 3 minutes to do. Everybody laughs about it. It opens up the conversation, and you have better conversations. We're even doing that with our customers and execs. So don't think your execs don't want to do Pick Your Nick. They do want to do Pick Your Nick as well too. So I think as we start thinking about going back to the office, what we can't do is go back to the office and be based in butcher paper and sticky notes, right? That we need to think digitally. So we need to refresh our rituals. And I really think that you can drive a lot of the culture that you want to have and a lot of the outcomes that you want to have, but also get that social component through rituals and updating our rituals to be more modern and more digital friendly.
Yeah, I'm curious what you're seeing the broader market doing or even asking for as it relates to digital collaboration. Mariano, any thoughts on this?
Of course, like the buzzword or phrase right now is hybrid or workspace or wherever workspace, depending on the acronym, and or office. And so, of course, like us in certain countries through rollout of vaccines and so forth, I mean, it's already safe to get together and so on, which is just in some parts of the world, by the way. People are starting to figure out what they do with their sunk cost, I call investment of real estate, right? I mean, there's chief facilities officers and they're trying to figure out how to take advantage of their facility. So there's a lot around that, but I think it's a little too late, right? Like the space part is one component of how we work. There's, of course, through the pandemic, people learned how to work digitally first, and in the beginning they had like video conferences that would last 4 hours, and then they started to shrink it and realize, do we really need a video conference to solve this problem? So we're seeing people going asynchronic, right, on documenting and having like video recording instead of like live videos. We're also seeing people starting to combine that with realizing that it's not just about digital, it's not just about asynchronic. Jim mentioned a few rituals, right? So they're introducing icebreakers to make meetings more interesting, and in a way, like they're paying attention to the meetings, right? So time and salaries more than rent as a cost or as an investment, right? The outcome of the meeting. So people are getting more savvy into designing meetings and designing time. So not just a meeting, but actually a workflow, right? I mean, meetings in theory are needed to move through a workflow to make a decision and so forth. So I think that people are starting to get eager to, design their time better. So it's not about space, it's about time actually. So I wish that more companies would have like a chief meetings officer or a chief time officer. I guess the chief of staff kind of like has that role instead of just chief facilities or I don't know, things like that. So I'm seeing more savviness into how people are thinking about collaboration.
Yeah, Mariano, I think that's interesting. I would add to that. I think the whole element of time is not only leaders trying to manage time, but also feeling like the speed at which they've had to make decisions has really changed. I mean, that to me was one of the big takeaways of the pandemic was it wasn't, call a bunch of meetings, fly everybody to an offsite sometime next month, sit down and figure out what your strategy is going to be, plan for the next all hands meeting a month later to roll out the strategy. It's like things were changing kind of by the day. And we were watching businesses sort of think about collaboration also as empowerment and starting to really try to get the best ideas and people closest to customers, people closest to decisions. Even in the real world, I remember going into the Starbucks near me right when the kind of first lockdown happened, and then they let the store sort of open back up. But I don't know what it was like where you were at, but you couldn't, I think actually, Mariano, I think you live near me, so you probably have the same experience, but I think, you weren't allowed to set foot in the Starbucks, but they were allowed to like hand you a coffee, like through the doorway, right? You could go there and pick stuff up, but you couldn't go inside. And I remember talking to one of the store managers, and she said what was interesting was they were really empowered to sort of figure it out in their local store, right? They got on calls and sort of collaborated with management, and they collaborated with their facilities teams. And it was sort of this two-way dialogue of like, what's the best way to deliver the service? And headquarters is trying to hear from people that are out distributed. The distributed teams are empowered to make local decisions and figure out what works best. And so I really feel like we've shifted a bit of our mindset in management teams, even at very large companies, of acknowledging that in some ways we're pretty disconnected from the front line and what people are doing. And we can kind of use technology to try to reconnect us and sort of share those ideas. I sort of like the idea of, that team, whether it be at Starbucks or at a bank or anywhere else, being able to sort of, get together virtually quickly, get in front of a tool like yours, put ideas forward, sort those ideas, and leave the meeting pretty quickly saying, let's go do something. And I just don't think that's the pace people were operating at pre-pandemic. And I think that's great, not just for leadership teams, but I think that's great as employees to feel like there's some, empowerment in what you're doing and collaborative ability to kind of share that back. I think that was where a lot of the workforce felt we sort of missed things in the early 2000s. It felt very top down, and, digital was a process that was handed to you.
It's so again, I talked about purpose before, and in a way you also talked about empowerment, right? I mean, so the interesting thing that happened last year is that we were in a global experiment, because I mean, what happens is like we had a new constraint, right? The new constraint was there is no more offices, right? And it was, so it's like when we do creative exercises, right? Like, so what if, again, there is no store? right? There is no swoon. There is no. So what would happen if Starbucks, if there is no stores, right? And in a way we brute force this, but I think that the capability, the competence of introducing what if scenarios like that one is also something that, again, people are going to start to realize, okay, what if we had no stores? And the reality is that we survived the pandemic. Well, unfortunately, that's not a nice statement for me. Like, as a humankind, I mean, a lot of people died, and we were resilient and we adapted, and through, I mean, social distancing, through certain things, of course, like we reacted probably too early. But again, now it's looking like there's a possibility to get through this disease. But the reality is, like, we know that we can carry on, right? And I think that's the most rewarding thing, and looking forward for the next decade of, improvements that came through this accelerated experiment globally that happened through the pandemic.
One of the things that we wanted to talk about today that you've sort of been hinting at, so we'll jump into it next, is digital transformation. So you were both speaking about just the pace of change and accelerated decision making. And more than that, we've seen an acceleration of digital transformation across how we live, work, and even play. And how do you think companies should be thinking about this as we move forward? Mariano, why don't you go first?
I think that the interesting thing is that we went through a year of practice, right? I mean, we probably don't want certain things that happened through last year, right? I mean, I really, fortunately, I was able to see my mother after a year or something. So there's certain things that we're in the context of a pandemic, but we were brute forced into doing this. And we spent a lot of hours doing this, at least knowledge workers or imagination workers in the office, right? So we kind of like learned, and we know what we like, what we don't like, and we tried things. And as I said, like, I think that there's an empowerment and an expertise, not only from leaders, but in everybody in the workforce, right? So it is a topic now. As I was joking around, like, 10 years ago, I mean, my less tech savvy friends would not talk about which games they would play, but then they would say, which is the game that you're playing on your mobile phone. Similarly, I heard these same people, like, which is your favorite video conferencing software? It's like, holy, like, what's going on? So we became experts in this, and hopefully, in things like, again, audio is getting better, lighting is getting better in each of our offices. But as I said before, it's not just about teleporting their ideas, but also like how to collaborate in a more thoughtful and purposeful way. And that's, I think, that in terms of Maslow, or however you want to call it, in terms of how we collaborate, that's the next stage for 2021, right? Like, making sure that when we spend time together, we spend it in the richest way possible.
Andy, what have you been hearing and thinking about as it relates to the acceleration of digital transformation, building on what Mariano was saying?
Yeah, I talked to other business leaders, many of them running kind of more traditional businesses than ours, right? I mean, when you think about the impact of COVID on companies that are in the, digital space, whether it's, digital collaboration or remote user testing kind of concepts, like we sort of had a different problem set to deal with than maybe if you were a small retailer or something like that. But what I hear a lot of folks talk about is, it wasn't like digital transformation jumped out of the shadows at people when this hit. I mean, this was sort of something we've been talking about for a long time. What I think it did was it sort of changed two big underlying dynamics in digital transformation. And one is the sort of innovator's dilemma. When you think about large companies that have been being disrupted by digitally first companies, they know this is happening. They've seen it happening, right? They know that their store traffic is down versus online shopping or whatever it might be. But it was sort of a situation where the dilemma kind of went away. There was no longer a previous revenue stream to protect. It was a innovate or die became kind of what they had to do, right, for the business. They had to change what they were doing. And so that created an urgency and sort of a change management opportunity to align the whole company on getting something done and sort of making it happen. And I think so that was one thing we heard a lot of leaders talk about. The other thing I would say is we also saw sort of a level of empathy emerge as a core human reaction to what was going on. And that happened both inside companies where people sort of rotated to how do I make sure that my team is safe, that my team is healthy, that my team can, manage through this, but also for customers. And so it was sort of this interesting combination for a lot of, I would call kind of more traditional businesses that were sort of slow to digital transformation. You sort of had the innovator's dilemma equation change, and they didn't want to seem opportunistic. They actually, I do believe most people genuinely care about their customers and they care about their employees. And so I feel like folks sort of leaned into a customer first digital transformation strategy with no holds barred on putting resources on it. And I think a lot of companies saw really good outcomes in doing that. I mean, customers want to be treated like that. And so I think that to me was really, in many ways, great to see that companies, in spite of what was going on in the world, looked at their resources and their business and said, how can I change my business urgently and quickly to not only be more digital, but be more helpful to my customers? And I think that created experiences that I don't think are going to go away right away. I mean, I think we're going to kind of see a shift in the way that we operate because of this. And so I sort of appreciate that that's been the approach. And I think it's sort of been the driver for seeing so much innovation in how people deliver their different business models.
One thing that I just thought when we were talking is that what we're seeing in our customers is that as they digitize ways of working, those and go through certain iterations of certain workflows and certain meetings, and they're happy with them, like similar to what Jim mentioned about like which Nick are you? These practices are now, as they are digital, they're copyable, right? So if something works really well in one part of the company, it generally gets viral and someone else incorporates that. Similarly to how best practices into, how you do user testing can also be copied across company, but within the company is also happening. So we see people like innovating in these icebreakers, and then they go everywhere else. So that's another like interesting thing about this is that, again, now best practices are digital in terms of how we work internally and viral. So it's super powerful because if one team is performing really well because of that, there's probably many others that can take advantage of that.
Yeah, that's a really great point. Janelle, I'd love to get your thoughts on that around the idea of digital transformation being not just about the technology, but kind of the culture within the company and maybe a culture of collaboration. How do you think about that and how it impacts day-to-day planning?
I think, to Andy's point, and Mariano, sort of like this acceleration of digital that happened pretty quickly, but we had been seeing those changes for a long time. And so I think this idea of sort of it forced you to transform because you had to survive. And the interesting part of all this transformation is that it's happening while teams are separated, like, physically, but perhaps collaborating even more remotely. And the digital part of your experience further also separates your team from your customers. You have to be really, really thoughtful about how you collaborate internally and how you get feedback from your customers. And, a lot of companies and what you see, a lot of the literature around digital transformation, I mean, it's the buzzword, you see it everywhere. A lot of companies believe that if they throw tech at the problem, that it's going to solve it. Like dollars will follow as soon as we buy the right technology to digitally transform our business. But they're missing this key element of being able to have it be sort of led by your customers. I want to share an example because I think as behaviors shift and change, as things open up, customer behavior is like this ever moving target as we go through the next couple of months or year. And it has been for the past year. And so that continual pulse on the customer is like so important to be able to build the right digital transformations. Early on in the pandemic, and I have like completely changed my behavior around how I shop. And so I do a lot of buying online and picking up at the store. And Target is a retailer that I've been using for this. And at the very beginning of the pandemic, I was super excited. I hadn't gone to any stores. And I'm like, okay, I'm going to buy online and go pick up at the store. Like they're going to bring it out to my car so I can make sure that I stay safe. Like I didn't want to be near other humans. And so I did that. And I showed up at the store. I placed my order. I showed up at the store. They came out. I, opened my trunk and with the button, and they were putting the stuff in. And then the rep came around to my side of the car and started telling me, with my window down and no mask on, all the things that were missing from my order. And it was like, wait a second, like, one, this could have been communicated to me digitally. And two, like, you're too close. And so actually, being the person that I am, contacted the store and gave them that feedback. And I must have not been the only one that was giving this feedback, because just a few months ago, when I did it again, yes, I did it again, even though it was like not a great experience, they actually started communicating this stuff in the email confirmation and through the app. But now when they bring your stuff out to your car, instead of coming and asking for your name, you press a button and a huge number comes across your screen, and you hold it up to your window with your window shut, and they type in the number, and then you're done. And so it's almost like they've, these things they're not perfect. And when we launch things, we have to learn over time. And so this idea of digital transformation, like, you're always transforming digitally. And it's like you're constantly shifting and moving based on what your customers need and what the feedback is.
So generally, basically go out around in the world and do user testing sessions for the shops.
Yes, this is my life. My husband won't take me anywhere because I'm constantly like over analyzing every experience in the real world. So
that's the curse of being a designer or a user researcher, is that you're always seeing the world through those lenses. I know, because I have a design background as well, Janelle. So I'm always analyzing what the better solution in the world is. It annoys other people to be like that. But you brought up a point, Janelle, about like physical equipment, and we actually get that question a lot. How many touchscreens should we buy, from customers and partners in our network as well too? But I'm much more focused on the mindset, as I think the other folk on the other panelists are as well too. And here's how I see it: that as where we work from, the location, and when we work, the time, become much more fluid. The constant is going to be the digital collaboration. That's going to be your new headquarters. That's what's stable. But collaborating digitally then brings up a lot of issues, like always on, Zoom fatigue. I can include everybody in my company in every call, so you have to kind of be judicious about that. And that's where I think the rituals and kind of reinventing how we work is important as well too. And that involves using your imagination, because I think at the heart of resiliency, when we talk about agility, and not agile, but agility, our ability to switch, like you just mentioned in your story there, right? Because that's the constant as well too. Agility is the new constant as well too. That requires imagination. And one thing that I saw during the pandemic was just the inventiveness that our customers brought to our product and in general to how they worked. And as we recognized here in the conversation too, we can do it. Because we had to do it, we can do it. But I think there's a lot more inventiveness and imagination that people have, and that they can put back into how they work.
Lots of heads nodding here. Let's jump to our last topic, building off of how we're thinking about distributed collaboration. The last topic we wanted to cover was diversity and inclusion and how that plays into this. Andy, I know you've got lots of thoughts on this topic, so I'll pass to you first.
Yeah, I think one of the things we have an opportunity to embrace in this new working model, and even in this new kind of digital first business model, I think, is to just include more perspectives, right? With the speed at which you can connect to another person, the way in which they can convey rich feedback to you, whether that's inside your company, whether that's outside your company with a customer, whether that's speaking to a prospect. I think the barrier to getting that perspective has never been lower. I think the desire for people to share their perspectives has never been higher. And I think it's really on us to start to try to connect those dots as leaders, to make a conscious effort to, think about our distributed teams and say, are we really getting everybody's perspectives from the different parts of the company, from different areas of the business, from every level in the company? Anybody who's running their C-suite as a little ivory tower up on the top floor of some building that has a special access code is probably doing it monumentally wrong at this point. That you have an opportunity to really get connected to people and understand their thoughts, their perspectives, what nick they are today. Like they should be able to make those connections. And I think it's true with customers too. We want to be treated like people, right? We want to be felt and understood. And And one of the challenges in so many businesses is no matter how diverse you think your team is, and I think we're all making some strides there, it's not going to be everyone from everywhere. And so just thinking about, if your pricing team is based in one part of the country, maybe giving them the opportunity to talk to some people or see the perspectives of people somewhere else and get their thoughts. I was on an interesting call with a customer recently where, they were making a distinct effort to go hear voices from people with different backgrounds than the team that was designing their product, just to hear what they thought of the designs early on. And so, I think that's the opportunity. We have this connectivity now. How do we think about using it? And I think that's an opportunity to just really share the knowledge that's trapped in so many people and bring it into the discussion.
Yeah, that's you just mentioned something which is, again, you're designing the process in this case. So you're spending the time to design the process, right? And to with that purpose in mind. So yeah, +1 to that. And you guys have a solution, at least for the validation, right? So on the last mile, so that if you don't have enough people in your team that have different backgrounds, to introduce them at least in the validation phase of your new designs. Because I was thinking about our own case, right? And I think that the interesting part about it's, many people, like, when this topic comes, I say, okay, are you hiring enough people from different backgrounds and so forth, which is, again, of course, an important first step. But the other thing is, like, wait, are there voices or participations being heard, right? Because we hired a bunch of people, but they're not contributing in input or decision making or so forth. So I think that it's interesting to have, like, clarity of purpose, clarity of where we're going, and then permission for people to participate, right? But not only permission, but I've been thinking a lot about this. How do we make a step in the way? And what you just said, I think it's an interesting idea that we should incorporate in our own process. I'm going to be stealing that one from you.
Happy to share. We're going to steal the pick your Nick. I mean, I've been spending half this meeting thinking about who my Nick is today. I'm feeling a little bit kind of Nicolas Cage in National Treasure, with my eyes kind of being open to some interesting ideas. But
and by the way, that's what I said before, right? Like, as we digitize these things, as we put them in flows, as we put a game around, okay, make sure that we're not, like, clueless, like completely off in terms of how we interact with a certain population of people and so forth. You can put a step into a process, right, into that, so that you don't forget about that. And if you guys already have that, and it's digital, okay, it's super easy for us to, like, copy and paste it.
Sadly, we're audio only, so the listeners can't see that Jim's changed his background for us to the pick your Nick options. We'll have to put a link to something along those lines in the show notes.
To Mariano's point, we have libraries and templates, and, just like at UserTesting as well, too. And I was able to bring that ritual out that we really like. So it can be repeated, as Mariano was talking about, over and over again. And you can get that diversity of perspective and inclusion, particularly if your rituals are designed to do that. And I think when we do talk about diversity and inclusion, the reason why it's important is because you get better results, right? Those perspectives and the multiplicity of those perspectives actually can pressure test your ideas and your decisions from different angles, so you actually end up with better results. But there's also a danger there as well, too, because with our digital tools, we can ask everybody in the company for every decision to have input, right? So the question is, how diverse, and when are you diverse, and when are you less diverse? Right. And those types of things. So I think that's important. And that goes along with digital transformation. The thing that we were just talking about is this, the rules of engagement are different now, right? Because if I have a meeting and I don't invite everybody, there's now another dynamic that I now have to deal with inside of the company, or even with customers as well, too.
But in general, something, I mean, I always share with folks. So we were 100 and something people a year and something ago, and now we're 500. So some folks that also joined the company also sometimes, like, expect that we have, like, a bunch of maturity on this topic, and we don't, because we are, like, relatively young in terms of our culture, right? But the nice thing about making it a topic is that it is a topic. It's something that you're aware of, and it's one of the things that you spend time thinking about, and hopefully turning the thinking into programs or versions versions of whichever features that you have. So the other thing is, I mean, in terms of like, we have a value which is adapt to thrive. By the way, we have another one which is think global. So in our core set of values, we also have a few things to remind us when we make certain behaviors, if they are on par with making it one in which, again, it is designed for a greater cause, because that's what we do. We are, as a company, trying to fulfill a mission, but also making sure that we don't leave anyone behind.
I'm curious how Mural and user testing and what we do as companies could help other organizations drive these sorts of initiatives at scale. Jim, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think, we were talking about some of the technical features and capabilities we have around templatizing and things like that. But for me, it's much more of a mindset. And, here at Mural, we have a lot of experts and subject matter experts. And we have a network of people, including people like Janelle at UserTesting, where we're trying to build the right best practices and the right behaviors and the right mindsets across our customers. And that kind of transcends, pixels on a screen or a tool, any tool that you have as well, too, right? So I think it's really thinking about, how it's what the superpower that a tool gives you, and then how you can best use it to address some of the topics that we were just talking about.
Yeah, I mean, when I think about the role that user testing can have at helping companies create more inclusive experiences at scale, like my heart nearly explodes. And I know that sounds really cheesy, but I truly believe that we have the opportunity to shift this at scale. And I think that that's something that we can bring to the world. We have access to such a wide variety of perspectives through our platform. And, there's just not any reason why teams shouldn't be harnessing this power as they build experiences. I mean, the reality is we all see the world through our own lens, and that lens is based on our life experiences. And in order to build experiences that are truly inclusive, we have to make sure that we're folding all of those perspectives into our process. Jim, I'm curious, you made a point that I kind of think of sometimes too, which is being able to access a digital platform like Mural, or even be a participant on the user testing panel. Like, there requires a level of technical expertise, right? And access. And we've been talking with customers about how do they even tap into people who can't even be a panelist or don't have access to these technologies. Yeah. Do you think about that at Mural, and like how you can include people who don't digitally whiteboard? Yeah,
we do very much. And, we have different levels of access, trying to make it easier. We also just launched a very large accessibility initiative as well, too. And, when you talk about accessibility, you tend to think of overcoming disabilities, but thinking about accessibility is about access, right? And how everyone benefits from those things as well, too. A quick example of that is, curbs that dip down so that, people with wheelchairs can get, from sidewalk to sidewalk. Well, guess what? That also helps people who have bicycles or rollerboard bags and things like that as well, too. So, we were talking about going back to the office and a much more fluid location of work, right? So what I'm seeing is, people using their phone and then going to an iPad and then their desktop and then in a meeting room and then back to their phone. So I think as we talk about this more fluid work environment that is digitally enabled as well, too, I think just the word access in general, I think is really important, and to think about how we're able to include people more and more.
Access and permission, right? So Janelle mentioned that whatever your comment was going to be cheesy, and so we are very stuck up at work, right? Like, I wish that play and fun would be things that would be more associated with going to work or doing work or whatever it is, because we take ourselves too seriously and people get offended too seriously. And of course, we need to be respectful for each other, but also acknowledging that we're here to have fun and enjoy our lives with, again, jobs that are mission critical, jobs that are like changing the world for the better, hopefully, and so forth. But if we take ourselves so seriously, it's going to be really hard for us to adapt and, again, play with each other in order to fulfill. So, like, ultimately our mission, right? It's level up teamwork with imagination so that work is more fun and innovation happens faster. But I wish, as I said, if there's like a final thought here, is like, let's play more together in these online games that allow us to do our work much better.
I love that, Mariano. And I would just add to thank you guys for your product, because one of the things I was thinking about when Jim was talking about so many meetings and making things accessible. One of the things you all helped me with was we had a big, our professional services team uses your product to design things with customers. I had a conflict with an internal meeting to talk about a solution we were building out in my daughter's t-ball game. And what they actually said was, we'll send you a write-up afterwards. And I was like, okay. Well, they sent me the write-up and then they sent me the link to the mural board. And I could basically see the collaboration process they went through, right? I could see what the team did. And so it was really empowering to feel like even if I wasn't able to be in the meeting, they could send me something and I could actually contribute to it. And I think, again, it just speaks to that, accessibility means so many different things. But to me, that actually meant that I could manage my life along with my work and still feel like I was participating and not have to be in every single meeting. And so I think tools like yours are so important to that. So I think there's a big opportunity for us to make work more fun and make life more fun if we can give people that kind of support. So thank you for that, both of you.
Well, thank you for the praise. And also, in a way, you just went on the record saying that it's okay to skip meetings to do your personal stuff.
She's only going to play t-ball for so long. So, exactly. You don't want to miss those things. And I tell my employees that all the time. You gotta find balance.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think that's a positive note to end things on today, and we're just about out of time. Thanks, everyone, for a really interesting discussion today. Thank you, Andy and Janelle, for letting me sit in as host. I will hand the reins back over to you for next week's episode with Christian Idiodi. And Mariano and Jim, thank you so much for joining us on the Human Insight podcast.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, cheers, thank you, guys. That was great.
Thank you.
Want to keep the conversation going? You can visit our podcast hub, usertesting.com/podcast, and check out past episodes. If you haven't already, don't forget to follow us on Apple Podcast, Spotify, Overcast, or Google Play, so you can never miss a good episode. And if you enjoyed today's show, please share it with a friend or leave us a rating and review on Apple Podcast.